Hello everybody, welcome to the shop. Doing a little more work on the downhill Dodge today. I am going to need to adjust my valves, and I'm going to show you how. I believe the recommended service interval for adjusting the valves is every 24,000 miles. And I'm not sure when the last time was that I did it. I know I adjusted the valves when I put my first HX35 turbo on here. So that was probably about 2 years ago. You're going to need to start by taking off all these valve covers. Just one bolt, that's all it is. And there's a nice reusable gasket on the valve covers. Now the one thing that you shouldn't forget to do, like I did before you take the valve covers off, is try to clean all of the gunk and pine needles and leaves and everything that are around the valve covers, because you run the risk of that stuff falling inside once you take the valve cover off. So I had to carefully scoop some of that away. Now the next step, now that the covers are off, is to crank the engine over until we see cylinder number 6 at crossover, which means one rocker arm is going up and the other rocker arm is starting to go down. That means that the number 1 cylinder is at top dead center. So here's some notes that I made, and you can pause the video if you want to take this down. When cylinder number 1 is at top dead center, which means cylinder 6 is at crossover, adjust intake valve number 1, 2, and 4, exhaust valve 1, 3, and 5. Then you crank it over until you're top dead center on cylinder number 6, which means that cylinder number 1 is at crossover. Then adjust intake valve 3, 5, and 6, exhaust valve 2, 4, and 6. Intake valve clearance is 10 thou, exhaust is 20 thou, and torque the lock nuts to 18 foot-pounds. Also, on each cylinder, the intake valve is on the front of the cylinder and the exhaust valve is on the back. Lastly, there's a number of ways to crank the engine over. There is a special engine barring tool that Cummins makes, and Snap-on makes, and a couple other companies. It fits in the back of the bell housing. There's a little cover. It just looks like a gear, and you put it in and you turn it over on the flywheel ring gear, which is the easiest way to go, but it's 50 bucks. I don't have it. I don't want to spend 50 bucks on it. You can also turn the alternator nut, or if you can reach down there, you can turn one of the nuts on the harmonic balancer. Also, don't make the mistake that I made once and wonder why it's not turning over. Make sure it's in neutral. So turning the alternator nut didn't work too well for me because it just slipped in the belt, even though this is a brand new belt. I couldn't really get in there on the balancer with a wrench to turn one of the nuts or one of the bolts. So what I'm doing, so here's a strap wrench that I made. This is wrapped around the balancer and it works perfectly for turning the engine over. However, I'm alone here and I have to look at the top of the engine while I'm lying on the ground here turning the engine over with my wrench. So since I can't watch the valves move, I made this Swamp Yankee indicator. I just wrapped some wire, some baling wire around, and I aligned each end of the wire with one rocker and the other, so I can turn the engine a little bit, come back up here and take a look at it and see how they've moved from before. Okay, so now the first step to adjust this rocker, I'm working on this one right here. I'm going to loosen the lock nut just a little bit. I already have a feeler gauge stuck in there. Now as I gently move the feeler gauge in and out, I'll start with the nut or the adjustment screw loose, and I'll slowly turn it in until I feel a drag. Right about there. Just a light drag. And that's what the Cummins engineers decided to be the correct adjustment. You don't want the feeler gauge to just slide in and slide out, but you also don't want it bound up. Now the problem here is that once we torque this lock nut, it's also going to take the adjustment screw with it a little bit and tighten that adjustment screw. So even though the adjustment is correct right now, it's going to be a little too tight later. So you're going to have to get a feel for it yourself. But generally you'll get a feel for how much to back it off so it's a little too loose. And then tighten the lock nut by hand. Then with a 14mm socket on your torque wrench, tighten it to 18 foot-pounds. And then give it a check. Now I'll slide my feeler gauge in and out, and I can feel that's too loose. In fact, I can twist the feeler gauge from side to side. So that's not good at all. So to adjust that, I'll pretty much follow the same process. And like I said, you'll get the hang of it after a while. I'm going to hold the screw in place with a screwdriver, then loosen it. Now, since the adjustment's too loose, I'm going to turn it in just a little bit. And then, again, hold the screw against the rotation with the screwdriver while I'm tightening by hand. And finish it off with the torque wrench. Still too loose, so I'm going to adjust it again. Again, loosen the nut, turn it in a little bit, tighten the nut, holding the screw in place with your screwdriver, torque it down. Now another problem you're going to find is that each adjuster is slightly different in how much the screw screws itself in while you're torquing the nut. So it kind of keeps you guessing a little bit, but you just have to deal with it. Now this feels just about right to me. There's a little bit of drag, but the feeler gauge does slide. So on to the next valve. Now I finished adjusting all the valves. I put the covers back on. I made sure to get the valve covers inside the lip of the gasket, not on the lip, so everything sits in there nicely and you don't ruin a gasket. Make sure to take off your strap wrench or socket or boring tool or whatever you're using to turn the motor over. Make sure to take that out. And she's ready to go. Let's fire it up and see how it works. Well, I'll let it warm and take it for a ride. Hopefully it doesn't have the knock that it had before when it was cold. And that's it, everybody. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more Dodge first gen Cummins videos. I put some out every once in a while. And make sure to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, everybody, and stay tuned for more.